The morning came pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first and found that a tree root had made a hole in his back, and that his neck was stiff. Walking for pleasure, why didn't I drive? He thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition. And all my beautiful feather beds are sold to the Sackville Bagginses. These tree roots would do them good. He stretched. Wake up, hobbits, he cried. It's a beautiful morning. What's beautiful about it? Said Pippin, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye. Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got the bath-water hot? Sam jumped up, looking rather bleary. No, sir, I haven't, sir, he said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin and rolled him over, and then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away, eastward, the sun was rising red out of the mist that lay thick on the world. Touched with gold and red, the autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootless in a shadowy sea. A little below him to the left, the road ran steeply into a hollow and disappeared. When he returned, Sam and Pippin had got a good fire going. Water! Shouted Pippin. Where's the water? I don't keep water in my pockets, said Frodo. We thought you had gone to find some, said Pippin, busy setting out the food in cups. You had better go now. You can come too, said Frodo, and bring all the water bottles. There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles in the small camping kettle at a little fall, where the water fell a few feet over an outcrop of gray stone. It was icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it dived under the road, and up the next slope and up and down another shoulder of hills. And by the time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary, zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them, they saw the lower lands dotted with small clumps of trees that melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody edge towards the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string. This road goes on forever, said Pippin, but I can't without a rest. It is high time for lunch. He sat down on the bank at the side of the road and looked away east into the haze, beyond which lay the river, and the end of the shire in which he had spent all his life. Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across lands he had never seen to a new horizon. Do elves live in those woods? He asked. Not that I ever heard, said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He too was gazing eastward along the road, as if he had never seen it before. Suddenly he spoke aloud, but as if to himself, saying slowly, The road goes ever on and on, down from Dor where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. That sounds like a bit of old Bilbo rhyming, said Pippin. Or is it one of your imitations? It does not sound altogether encouraging. I don't know, said Frodo. It came to me then, as if I was making it up, but I may have heard it long ago. Certainly it reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years before he went away. He used often to say there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door, he used to say. You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Do you realize that this is the very path that goes through Mirkwood, and that if you let it, it might take you to the Lonely Mountain or even further into worse places? He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he had been out for a long walk. Well, the road won't sweep me anywhere for an hour at least, said Pippin, unslinging his pack. The others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank and their legs out into the road. After a rest, they had a good lunch, and then more rest. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light of afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far, they had not met a soul on the road. That was not much This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, but there was little traffic to the woody end. They had been jogging along again for an hour or more when Sam stopped a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road after which much winding lay straight ahead through grassland sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of the approaching woods. "I could hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind," said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far. "I wonder if that is Gandalf coming after us," said Frodo, but even as he said it, he had a feeling that it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him. "It may not matter much," he said apologetically, "but I would rather not be seen on the road by anyone. I am sick of my doings being noticed and discussed, and if it is Gandalf," he added as an afterthought, "we can give him a little surprise to pay him out for being so late. Let's get out of sight." The other two ran quickly to the left and down into a little hollow not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of the hoofs drew nearer. Just in time, he threw himself down in a patch of long grass behind a tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously above one of the great roots. Round the corner came a black horse, no hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse, and on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots and the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat quite still with his head bowed, as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise, as if someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold of Frodo, and he thought of the ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire to get it out of his pocket became so strong that he began slowly to move his hand. He felt that he had only to slip it on, and then he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought, as his hand touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled to the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right. "Well, I call that very queer and indeed disturbing," said Frodo to himself as he walked towards his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behavior. "I can't say why, but I felt certain he was looking for or smelling for me, and also I felt certain that I did not want him to discover me. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before." "But what has one of the big people got to do with us?" said Pippin. "And what is he doing in this part of the world?" "There are some men about," said Frodo. "Down in the South Farthing they have had trouble with big people, I believe, but I have never heard of or anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from." "Begging your pardon," put in Sam suddenly, "I know where he comes from. It's from Hobbiton that this here Black Rider comes, unless there's more than one, and I know where he's going to." "What do you mean?" said Frodo sharply, looking at him in astonishment. "Why didn't you speak up before?" "I have only just remembered, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, 'Hallo, Sam,' he says. 'I thought you were away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for Mr. Baggins at Bag End, and he's only just gone. I've sent him to Bucklebury. Not that I like the sound of him. He might seemed mighty put out when I told him Mr. Baggins had left his home for the good. Hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder. 'What sort of fellow was he?' says I to the gaffer. 'I don't know,' says he. 'But he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckon it was just one of the big folk from foreign parts. He spoke funny.' I couldn't stay to hear more, sir, since you were waiting, and I didn't give much heed to it myself. The gaffer is getting old, and more than a bit blind. It must have been near dark when this fellow came up the hill and found him taking the air at the end of our row. I hope he hasn't done no harm, sir, nor me." "The gaffer can't be blamed anyway," said Frodo. "As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to a stranger who seemed to be inquiring of me, and I nearly went and asked him who it was. I wish I had, or you had told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road." "Still, there may be no connection between this rider and the gaffer's stranger," said Pippin. "We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have followed us." "What about the smelling, sir?" said Sam. "And the gaffer said he was a black chap." "I wish I had waited for Gandalf," Frodo muttered, "but perhaps it would only have made matters worse." "Then you know or guess something about this rider," said Pippin, who had caught the muttered word. "I don't know. I would rather not guess," said Frodo. "All right, Cousin Frodo, you can keep your secret for the present, if you want to be mysterious. In the meanwhile, what are we to do? I should take a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we better move on from here. Your talk of sniffing riders with invisible noses has unsettled me." "Yes, I think we will move on now," said Frodo, "but not on the road in case that rider comes back or another follows him. We ought to do a good step more today. Buckland is still miles away." The shadows of the trees were long and thin in the grass as they started off again. They now kept a stone's throw to the left of the road and kept out of sight of it as much as they could, but this hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and evening was coming on before they came back to the road at the end of the long level over which it had run straight for some miles. At that point it bent left and went down into the lowlands of the Yale, making for Stock, but a lane branched right, winding through a wood of ancient oak trees on its way to Woodhall. "That is the way for us," said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting, they came on the huge hulk of a tree. It was still alive and had leaves on the small branches that it had put out round the broken stumps of its long fallen limbs. But it was hollow and could be entered by a great crack on the side away from the road. The hobbits crept inside and sat there upon a floor of old leaves and decaying wood. They rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. Twilight was about them as they crept back to the lane. The west wind was sighing in the branches. Leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently but steadily into the dusk. A star came out above the trees in the darkening east before them. They went abreast in step to keep up their spirits. After a time, as the stars grew thicker and brighter, the feeling of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened for the sound of the hoofs. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits, it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made the words, to a tune that was as old as the hills, and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the Water Valley and talked about adventure. "Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not yet weary are our feet, still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower and leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner they may wait, a new road or a secret gate. And though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way, and take the hidden paths that run toward the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut and sloe, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, fare you well, fare you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then world behind and home ahead, we'll wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed." The song ended. "And now to bed, and now to bed," sang Pippin in a high voice. "Hush," said Frodo. "I think I hear hoofs again." They stopped suddenly and stood as silent as tree shadows, listening. There was a sound of hooves in the lane, some way behind, but coming slow and clear down the winds. Quickly and quietly, they slipped off the path and ran into the deeper shade under the oak trees. "Don't let us go too far," said Frodo. "I don't want to be seen, but I want to see if it's another Black Rider." "Very well," said Pippin, "but don't forget the sniffing." The hooves drew nearer. They had no time to find any hiding place better than the general darkness under the trees. Sam and Pippin crouched behind a large tree bole, while Frodo crept back a few yards towards the lane. It showed gray and pale, a line of fading light through the wood. Above it the stars were thick in the dim sky, but there was no moon. The sound of hoofs stopped. As Frodo watched, he saw something dark pass across the lighter space between two trees, and then halt. It looked like a black shade of a horse led by a smaller black shadow. The black shadow stood close to the point where they had left the path, and it swayed from side to side. Frodo thought he heard the sound of snuffling. The shadow bent to the ground, and then began to crawl towards him. Once more, the desire to slip on the ring came over Frodo, but this time it was stronger than before, so strong that almost before he realized what he was doing, his hand was groping in his pocket. But at that moment there came a sound like mingled song and laughter. Clear voices rose and fell in the starlit air. The black shadow straightened up and retreated. It climbed onto the shadowy horse and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. Frodo breathed again. "Elves!" exclaimed Sam in a hoarse whisper. "Elves, sir!" He would have burst out of the trees and dashed off towards the voices if they had not pulled him back. "Yes, it is elves," said Frodo. "One can meet them sometimes in the woody end. They don't live in the Shire, but they wander into it in the spring or autumn, out of their own lands, away beyond the Tower Hills. I am thankful they do. You do not see, but the Black Rider stopped just here and was actually crawling towards us when the song began. As soon as he heard the voices, he slipped away." "What about the elves?" said Sam, too excited to trouble about the rider. "Can we go and see them?" "Listen, they are coming this way," said Frodo. "We have only to wait." The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue, of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound, blending with the melody, seemed to shape itself in their thought into words which they only partly understood. But this was the song as Frodo heard it. Snow white, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. Gulthoniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes and bright thy breath. Snow white, we sing to thee in a far land beyond the sea. O stars that in the sunless year with shining hands by her were sewn, in windy fields now bright and clear, we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth, Gulthoniel, we still remember who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas." The song ended. "Those are the High Elves. They spoke the name of Elbereth," said Frodo in amazement. "Few of that fairest folk are ever seen in the Shire. Not many now remain in Middle-earth, east of the Great Sea. This is indeed a strange chance." The hobbits sat in shadow by the wayside. Before long, the elves came down the lane towards the valley. They passed slowly, and the hobbits could see the starlight glimmering on their hair and in their eyes. They bore no lights, yet as they walked in a shimmer, like the light of the moon above the rim of the hills before it rises, seemed to fall about their feet. They were now silent, and as the last elf passed, he turned and looked towards the hobbits and laughed. "Hail, Frodo!" he cried. "You are abroad late, or are you perhaps lost?" Then he called aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered round. "This is indeed wonderful," they said. "3 hobbits in a wood at night. We have not seen such a thing since Bilbo went away. What is the meaning of it?" "The meaning of it, fair people," said Frodo, "is simply that we seem to be going the same way as you are. I like walking under the stars, but I would welcome your company." But we have no need for other company, and hobbits are so dull, they laughed. But how do you know that we go the same way as you? For you do not know whither we are going. And how do you know my name? Asked Frodo in return. We know many things, they said. We have seen you often before with Bilbo, though you may not have seen us. Who are you, and who is your lord? Asked Frodo. I'm Gildor, answered their leader, the elf who had first hailed him. Gildor Inglorion, of the house of Finrod. We are exiles, and most of our kindred have long ago departed, and we too are now only tarrying here a while, ere we return over the great sea. But some of our kinsfolk dwell still in peace in Rivendell. Come now, Frodo, tell us, what are you doing? For we see that there is some shadow of fear upon you. Oh, wise people, interrupted Pippin eagerly, tell us about the Black Riders. Black Riders, they said in low voices. Why do you ask about Black Riders? Because two Black Riders have overtaken us today, or one has done so twice, said Pippin. Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew nearer. The elves did not answer at once, but spoke together softly in their own tongue. At length Gildor turned to the hobbits. We will not speak of this here, he said. We think you had best come now with us. It is not our custom, but for this time we will take you on our road, and we shall lodge with us tonight if you will. O fair folk, this is good fortune beyond my hope, said Pippin. Sam was speechless. I thank you indeed. Indeed, Gildor Inglorion, said Frodo, bowing. Ellen Silla Lumen Omentilio, foe. A star shines on the hour of our meeting, he added in the elven high speech. Be careful, friends, cried Gildor, laughing. Speak no secrets. Here is a scholar in the ancient tongue. Bilbo was a good master. Hail, elf friends, he said, bowing to Frodo. Come now with your friends and join our company. You had best walk in the middle so that you may not stray. You may be wary before we halt. Why? Where are you going? Asked Frodo. For tonight we go to the woods on the hills above Woodhall. It is some miles, but you shall have rest at the end of it, and it will shorten your journey tomorrow. They now marched on again in silence, and passed like shadows in faint lights, for elves, even more than hobbits, could walk when they wished without sound or footfall. Pippin soon began to feel sleepy, and staggered once or twice, but each time a tall elf at his side put out his arm and saved him from a fall. Sam walked along at Frodo's side, as if in a dream, with an expression on his face, half of fear and half of astonished joy. The woods on either side became denser. The trees were now younger and thicker, and as the lane went lower, running down into the fold of the hills, there were many deep breaks of hazel on the rising slopes at either hand. At last the elves turned aside from the path. A green ride lay almost unseen through the thickets on the right, and this they followed as it wound away back up the wooded slopes onto the top of a shoulder of the hills that stood out into the lower land of the river valley. Suddenly they came out of the shadow of the trees, and before them lay a wide space of grass, gray under the night. On three sides the woods pressed up upon it, but eastward the ground fell steeply, and the tops of the dark trees growing at the bottom of the slope were below their feet. Beyond, the lowlands lay dim and flat under the stars. Near at hand a few lights twinkled in the village of Woodhall. The elves sat on the grass and spoke together in soft voices. They seemed to take no further notice of the hobbits. Frodo and his companions wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets, and drowsiness stole over them. The night grew on, and the lights in the valley went out. Pippin fell asleep, pillowed on a green hillock. Away high in the east swung Rimarath, the netted stars, and slowly above the mist red Borgil rose, glowing like a jewel of fire. Then by some shift of airs, all the mist was drawn away like a veil, and there leaned up, as he climbed over the rim of the world, the swordsman of the sky, Menelvagor, with his shining belt. The elves all burst into song. Suddenly under the trees a fire sprang up with a red light. Come, the elves called to the hobbits. Come, now it's time for speech and merriment. Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered. There is a fire in the hall and food for hungry guests, said an elf standing before him. At the south end of the greensward there was an opening. There the green floor ran on into the wood and formed a wide space like a hall, roofed by the boughs of trees. Their great trunks ran like pillars down each side. In the middle there was a wood fire blazing, and upon the tree pillars torches with lights of gold and silver were burning steadily. The elves sat round the fire upon the grass or upon the sawn rings of old trunks. Some went to and fro, bearing cups and pouring drink. Others brought food on heaped plates and dishes. "This is poor fare," they said to the hobbits, "for we are lodging in the greenswood far from our halls. If ever you are a guest at home, we will treat you better." "It seems to me enough for my birthday party," said Frodo. Pippin afterwards recalled little of either food or drink, for his mind was filled with the light upon the elf faces, and the sound of voices so various and so beautiful that he felt in a waking dream. But he remembered that there was bread, surpassing the savor of a fair white loaf to one who was starving, the fruits sweet as wild berries and richer than the tended fruits of gardens. He drained a cup that was filled with a fragrant draught, cool as a clear fountain, golden as a summer afternoon. Sam could never describe in words, nor picture clearly to himself what he felt or thought that night, though it remained in his memory as one of the chief events of his life. The nearest he ever got was to say, "Well, sir, if I could grow apples like that, I would call myself a gardener." But it was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean. Frodo sat eating, drinking, and talking with delight, but his mind was chiefly on the spoken words. He knew a little of the elf speech and listened eagerly. Now and again he spoke to those that served him and thanked them in their own language. They smiled at him and said, laughing, "Here is a jewel among hobbits." After a while, Pippin fell fast asleep and was lifted up and borne away to a bower under the trees, where he was laid upon a soft bed and slept the rest of the night away. Sam refused to leave his master. When Pippin had gone, he came and sat curled up at Frodo's feet, where at last he nodded and closed his eyes. Frodo remained long awake, talking with Gildor. They spoke of many things, old and new, and Frodo questioned Gildor much about happenings in the wide world outside the Shire. The tidings were mostly sad and ominous, of gathering darkness and wars of men, and the flight of the elves. At last Frodo asked the question that was nearest to his heart. "Tell me, Gildor, have you ever seen Bilbo since he left us?" Gildor smiled. "Yes," he answered, "twice. He said farewell to us in this very spot, but I saw him once again far from here." He would say no more about Bilbo, and Frodo fell silent. "You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo," said Gildor, "but I already know a little, and I can read more in your face than in the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt that you will find what you seek or accomplish what you intend, or that you will never, ever return. Is that not so?" "It is," said Frodo, "but I thought my going was a secret known only to Gandalf and my faithful Sam." He looked down at Sam, who was snoring gently. "The secret will not reach the enemy from us," said Gildor. "The enemy?" said Frodo. "Then you know why I am leaving the Shire?" "I do not know for what reason the enemy is pursuing you," answered Gildor, "but I perceive that he is strange indeed, though that seems to me. And I warn you that peril is now both before you and behind you and upon either side." "You mean the riders? I feared that they were servants of the enemy. What are the Black Riders?" "Has Gandalf told you nothing?" "Nothing about such creatures." "Then I think it is not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey, for it seems to me that you have set out only just in time, if indeed you are in time. You must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection to you." "I cannot imagine what information could be more terrifying than your hints and warnings," exclaimed Frodo. "I knew that danger lay ahead, of course, but I did not expect to meet it in our own Shire. Can't a hobbit walk from the water to the river in peace?" "But it is not your own Shire," said Gildor. "Others dwelt here before hobbits were, and others will dwell here again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you, and you fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out." "I know," and yet it has always seemed so safe and familiar. What can I do now? My plan was to leave the Shire secretly and make my way to Rivendell, but now my footsteps are dodged before ever I get to Buckland. I think you should still follow that plan, said Gildor. I do not think the road will prove too hard for your courage, but if you desire clearer counsel, you should ask Gandalf. I do not know the reason for your flight, and therefore I do not know by what means your pursuers will assail you. These things Gandalf must know. I suppose that you will see him before you leave the Shire? I hope so, but that is another thing that makes me anxious. I have been expecting Gandalf for many days. He was to have come to Hobbiton at the latest 2 nights ago, but he never appeared. Now I am wondering what could have happened. Should I wait for him? Gildor was silent for a moment. I do not like this news, he said at last. That Gandalf should be late does not bode well. But it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards,